The revelation of the revelation. The four Gospels explained by their writers by Jean-Baptiste Roustaing, 1881. Source: www.tinyurl.com/the four Gospels. Matthew, chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. And Luke, chapter 3, verses 23 to 38.
Matthew. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Judah and his brethren, and Judah begat Phares and Zara of Thamar, and Phares begat Esrom, and Esrom begat Aram, and Aram begat Aminadab, and Aminadab begat Naasson, and Naasson begat Salmon, and Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab, and Boaz begat Obed of Ruth, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king, and King David begat Solomon of the wife of Uriah, and Solomon begat Rehoboam, and Rehoboam begat Abia, and Abia begat Asa, and Asa begat Jehosaphat, and Jehosaphat begat Jehoram, and Jehoram begat Ozias, and Ozias begat Jontham, and Jontham begat Ahaz, and Ahaz begat Hezekiah, and Hezekiah begat Manasseh, and Manasseh begat Aman, and Aman begat Josiah, and Josiah begat Jechonias and his brethren, about the time of their being carried away to Babylon. And after their removal to Babylon, Jechonias begat Salathiel, and Salathiel begat Zorobabel, and Zorobabel begat Obiat, and Obiat begat Eliakim, and Eliakim begat Assur, Assur begat Sodok, and Sodok begat Ahim, and Ahim begat Eliud. And Eliud begat Eleazar, and Eleazar begat Matthan, and Matthan begat Jacob, and Jacob begat Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom was born Jesus, who is called Christ. Therefore all the generations from Abraham to David are 14 generations, and from David to the carrying away to Babylon are 14 generations, and from the carrying away to Babylon to Christ are 14 generations. Luke. Then Jesus himself was about 30 years of age, being regarded as the son of Joseph, the son of Heli, the son of Matthan, the son of Levi, the son of Melchi, the son of Janna, the son of Joseph, the son of Mattathias, the son of Amos, the son of Nahum, the son of Yesli, the son of Nogi, the son of Mart, the son of Mattathias, the son of Semei, the son of Joseph, the son of Judah, the son of Joannas, the son of Ressa, the son of Zorobabel, the son of Salathiel, the son of Meri, the son of Melchi, the son of Addi, the son of Kosom, the son of Elmodam, the son of the son of Hoses, the son of Eleazar, the son of Chorim, the son of Mathat, the son of Levi, the son of Simeon, the son of Judah, the son of Joseph, the son of Jonan, the son of Eliakim, the son of Meliah, the son of Mainan, the son of Mattatha, the son of Nathan, the son of David, the son of Jesse, the son of Obed, the son of Boaz, the son of Salmon, the son of Naasson, the son of Aminadab, the son of Aram, the son of Esrom, the son of Phares, the son of Judah, the son of Jacob, the son of Isaac, the son of Abraham, the son of Terah, the son of Nachor, the son of Sarch, the son of Ragan, the son of Phalec, the son of Heber, the son of Salah, the son of Canaan, the son of Arphaxad, the son of Shem, the son of Noah, the son of Lamech, the son of Methuselah, the son of Enoch, the son of Jared, the son of Mahalaleel, the son of Canaan, the son of Enos, the son of Seth, the son of Adam, who was the son of God.
Section 55. You have already been instructed that Jesus is a spirit of perfect and immaculate purity, whose origin is lost in the darkness of bygone eternities. He is the protector and ruler of your planet, and watched over its formation. Consequently, he is both superior and anterior to the generations of men who have successively inhabited it. He appeared on your earth with a visible and tangible fluidic body, resembling a human body in appearance, but of a perispiritic nature, incorporated by an adaptation of the laws of the superior worlds to the surrounding fluids which form your beings. You also know that this secret of the other world was not intended to be revealed until the opening of the new era of Spiritism in your own days, when the progress which you have made has enabled you to receive this revelation. Do not be surprised that Jesus of Nazareth was regarded by the Hebrews as of the same nature as his ancestors according to the flesh. If you examine into his spiritual genealogy, it will lead you back to God, the immediate and only creator of everything which is pure and perfect. The human genealogy attributed to Jesus is of no interest or importance in connection with the labors of his mission, or with its fulfillment in the regeneration of mankind. If you consider the necessity of materializing all facts to render them intelligible to man, you will perceive the necessity of using expressions which could be understood and listened to conformably with circumstances which had been prearranged for many ages. According to Hebrew traditions and the current interpretations of the writings of the prophets, it was expected that the Christ would be born at Bethlehem, among the descendants of David. The needful preparations for the great work of redemption began in very early times, though men were not aware of it, and these were carried on under conditions appropriate to the state of intelligence at different periods. In order to accomplish this great work, Mary and Joseph, who were perfect spirits, were both incarnated on a mission to aid Jesus in his earthly mission. Joseph was less elevated than Mary, and they were both spirits who had not remained pure, but had been purified, and who were consequently inferior to Jesus. But their regained purity could not be sullied by impure surroundings, and they each selected a family which had been prepared for them beforehand, and which was likewise composed of superior spirits, though less elevated than themselves. But as you trace their ancestors back from generation to generation, you meet with men animated with every brutish instinct. You know that during the whole earthly mission of Jesus, men regarded Mary as his mother and Joseph as his father, and by descent from Joseph, Jesus was the son of David. Man cannot understand anything without fixing his attention on some starting point from whence he can proceed in a direct line. The genealogies were written for Hebrews under the yoke of the Mosaic law, who were influenced by traditions handed down from age to age, the origin of which was lost in the obscurity of the past. It was therefore needful to direct their intelligence according to their accustomed manner of thought. The root of the genealogy attributed to Jesus is Adam, materially the first man created by the hand of God. Intelligence has become developed and science has advanced in the course of ages. You now know that the creation of man from the dust of the ground, in a terrestrial paradise, in the midst of which stood the trees of life and of the knowledge of good and evil, is an allegory required to enable human intelligence to appropriate the lessons which it embodies. Even now, how few among you are able to comprehend eternal existence, without either beginning or end. The genealogy of Jesus ascends to Adam by a figure, as the creation of the body of dust ascends to God. The literal interpretation of Genesis could not have been contradicted, then, without offending the masses, alarming the feeble, and impeding the progress of the work of regeneration. According to both Matthew and Luke, Jesus is the son of David through Joseph, his human father, who is himself shown to be a descendant of David. The genealogy was recorded by both evangelists for the purpose of connecting the birth of Jesus with David, and they made researches accordingly, but much is lost in the obscurity of time, and many names were substituted for those which were unknown, and which they supposed ought to exist, but names are of little consequence, and genealogical relations were established by family relationships. The discrepancies between the two genealogies need not be discussed. The root is the same, and the names sometimes belong to the same individuals, owing to confusion between the children of two brothers, and similar errors. Does it not sometimes happen that you yourselves bear additional names, or even change your names from human vanity, and will not those who look back upon your lives in future ages use sometimes one name and sometimes another, and yet they will denote the same individual? One writer followed one line of ancestors, and the other another, but the source was the same. The two genealogies both agree in Joseph's descent from David, which was the only essential point in the eyes of the Hebrews. It is not surprising that the descent of Mary was not recorded likewise. Daughters were not included in the genealogies of the Israelites, even as they do not perpetuate a name among your noble families. It was only important to know that Mary belonged to the same tribe. We have said that it is necessary to employ human means, which are always imperfect, to attain any desired spiritual end. The Apostle Paul thus alludes to the controversies on the human genealogy attributed to Jesus, neither pay any attention to fables and endless genealogies, which are the cause of disputes rather than the government of God in faith. Now the end of the commandment is love from a pure heart, and good conscience, and heartfelt faith. 1 Timothy 1, verses 4 and 5, leave such disputes to the so-called wise men of your own time, who exert all their strength to move or overturn the small stumbling blocks in their way. Remember that you must reserve your own strength to remove a mountain which stands in the way of the one straight path which it is yours to map out. Remember the words of the angel to Mary, Luke 1, verse 32, those in the Song of Zacharias, Luke 1, verses 68 to 70, and what Jesus said to the Pharisees, "What think ye of Christ? Whose son is he?" "David's," answered they. "Why, then," replied Jesus, "does he say in the Psalms, my Lord, through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, in the words, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit at my right hand till I have made thy enemies thy footstool? If then David calls him Lord, how is he his son?" Matthew 22, verses 41 to 43, Luke 20, verses 41 to 44. Thus Jesus during his earthly ministry prepared men to understand that this human genealogy is inapplicable to him, that they might afterwards be more ready to accept the revelation of his extra-human origin and nature. Section 56. What is the actual truth respecting the creation of the spirit and body of man? And what is the spiritual genealogy of Jesus? You have asked two distinct questions, one referring to man, and the other to Jesus. It must be answered from a general point of view in relation to the origin of the soul, its phases, its progress, and its destinies, from the moment of its origin till the period when it attains to perfection. Everything in creation, literally everything, has a common origin, and rises from the infinitely little to the infinitely great, even unto God, who is at once the origin and goal of all things. Never forget that everything proceeds from God, and returns to him, God, the uncreated creator, the Father of each and all, God, the great creator of all that exists, the immovable pillar which supports the myriads of worlds which are scattered through space like atoms in the air. The universal fluid surrounding and proceeding from God is the instrument, and means of action of the supreme intelligence. His omnipotence and will regulates its properties, combinations, modifications and transformations in infinity and eternity. Thus he effects all the spiritual, material and fluidic creations resulting in life and universal harmony, and thus he creates all worlds, and everything which lives and moves and has its being in all the kingdoms of nature. The Apostle Paul felt the creative power of the Lord when he said, "For in him we live and more and are," Acts 17, verse 28, "For of him and through him and in him are all things," Romans 11, verse 36. The Spirit is a spiritual essence, and is the principle of intelligence from the moment of its formation. It springs from the universal whole, that is, from the fluids diffused through space, which are the source of everything which exists, either in a spiritual, fluidic, or material condition. The Spirit at its origin as a spiritual essence is an intelligent principle formed of the quintessence of these fluids. It is so ethereal that no language could convey any idea of it, especially to your limited intelligence. The will of the Lord God Almighty, the one sole essence of life in infinity and eternity, animates these fluids to give them being by means of a subtle combination, the essence of which is only found in the divine radiance. Thus he converts them into spiritual essences, which are the primitive principles destined for the formation of the germinating spirit. Life thus exists everywhere throughout nature in these eternal germs, which God animates by his will alone, according to the necessities of the universal harmony of all worlds, kingdoms and creatures, whether in the material or in the fluidic state. When the material worlds are formed, they are composed of all the constituent principles of the different kingdoms of nature which the ages will evolve in the spiritual, material, and fluidic order. The intelligent principle is developed at the same time as matter, and progresses with it, passing from inertia to life. God watches over the commencement of all things, and his paternal eye follows the phases of each step in advance, and he attracts to himself everything which has attained to perfection. These multitudinous latent principles remain inert till the sovereign master assigns them to the appropriate end which they were intended to fulfill, according to the immutable and eternal laws of nature which he has established, under the influence of such surroundings as are fitted to unfold them. They then passively undergo the transformations requisite for their development through ages which might appear eternal, under the direction and guidance of spirits entrusted with their care, and pass successively through the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, and through the intermediate forms and species which connect each of these kingdoms together. By following this continual progression they arrive at length at the period which is preparatory to formed spirit, that is, the intermediate state between animal incarnation and the conscious spiritual state. After passing through this preparatory period they attain to the condition of a creature in possession of free will, with concentrated and independent intelligence, and responsible for its actions. They thus become fitted for intelligence, knowledge and greatness. When the spiritual essence originates as a principle of intelligence, or a spirit in course of formation, it passes first into the mineral kingdom, and animates the mineral, if we may be allowed thus to express ourselves, by using the only expressions appropriate to your limited intelligence which human language permits us. We say it animates the mineral, for everything has a real existence in nature, since everything dies, and everything which dies has possessed the principle of life, and was thus animated by relative intelligence. You may wonder using the word intelligence in speaking of an inert object. Certainly it possesses neither thought nor action, and the spiritual essence is unconscious of its being. In this stage it exists, nothing more. The spiritual essence is then in the condition of a simple essence of life, and is wholly unconscious of its existence. It builds up the rock and the mineral by attracting and combining the appropriate fluids through the action of magnetic attraction directed by the controlling spirits. The action of these spirits is more direct and constant in proportion to the unconsciousness of the evolving spirit. In order to avoid repetition, we wish you to observe specially that nothing exists in any of the kingdoms of nature, whether mineral, vegetable, animal, or human, without the supervision of the spirits of the Lord. All have a task to fulfill and something to watch over, but spirits are not appointed to regulate the formation of individual minerals, plants, or beings. Their action is general, being exerted through immutable natural laws, which it is not yet allowable or possible for you to understand, and their operation is exerted over the mass. The mineral dies when it is removed from the surroundings in which the author of nature has placed it. When the stone is taken from the quarry, or the mineral is dug from the mine, they lose their natural life, like a plant uprooted from the soil. The spiritual essence which existed in the pores of the mineral is withdrawn from it by magnetic action directed by the guardian spirits, and is transferred to another point, while the body of the mineral, from which the spirit has departed, is applied to the use for which man designs it. It need not surprise you that the mineral should frequently preserve its coherence for ages after the spiritual essence which was necessary for its formation has departed. Every substance has its relative properties, according to laws which you cannot yet understand. Does not the human body preserve the cohesion of all its material parts under certain circumstances, although the spirit has left it? Do you not notice cases of material duration among plants? And do not some plants preserve the appearance of life, both the freshness of color and the firmness of the stem, for a long time after they have been separated from the earth in which they grew, and consequently from the latent principle of intelligence which existed in them? Everything in nature is linked together with a view to the advantage and usefulness of the spirit which has arrived at the conscious stage of being. Dead bodies, whether stone, plant, animal, or man, aid in the universal harmony by fulfilling the functions which are assigned to them. The spiritual essence which animates the mineral is not an individual. It forms a whole, which is personified and divided when the mass is divided, and it thus attains to individuality. This happens also in the case of the principles animating the polyp and certain plants, while in the mineral kingdom, the spiritual essence undergoes the successive materializations which are needful to prepare it to pass through the connecting links which participate in the nature of the mineral and of the plant. We say materializations, for we cannot say incarnations at the commencement of a being. After having thus passed through these intermediate forms, which are connected together by continual progression, and after the double magnetic action which produces life and death in the phases of existence through which it has already passed, it is prepared to undergo the experience of sensation which awaits it in the plant. The spiritual essence, or spirit in the state of formation, then passes into the vegetable kingdom. This is a step in advance, but there is still no consciousness of existence. Material existence is then both shorter and more rapid, but there is neither consciousness nor suffering, only sensation. Thus, when a living branch is cut from a tree, there is a kind of echo of the wound which has been made. There is no suffering, only a sort of vibration from one point to another, just as when a plant is violently uprooted before it has arrived at maturity. A magnetic vibration is perceived, which prepares the spiritual essence to develop its being. After the death of the plant, the spiritual essence is transferred to another point, and after undergoing successive and necessary and always progressive materializations, it passes on to the intermediate forms which participate in the vegetable and the animal. In these last stages of existence, when the developing spirit begins to feel an exterior action, though without knowledge of its causes or effects, the sensation of pain commences. Thus, the spirit which is being developed under the care and supervision of attendant spirits, effects its development relatively to the matter which envelopes it, by continuous progression, until it attains to the consciousness of its existence. When it is prepared for active, exterior and relative life, the developing spirit passes into the animal kingdom. It becomes an intelligent principle, and possesses the kind of intelligence which you call instinct. It possesses will and faculties, limited to its necessities and the preservation of its material life, to its allotted functions and to the object which it is intended to fulfill in nature, according to the measure in which it is to contribute to the universal life and harmony. The spirit is still in course of formation, for it is still without free will, or independent rational knowledge of its faculties and actions. It then passes on in the animal kingdom, by a continuous progressive advance, in proportion to the progress already made, and to that which is still necessary. It passes through all the successive phases of existence which are required to develop it, and to conduct it to the limit of the intermediate forms which participate both in the animal and in man. These intermediate stages gradually bring it nearer and nearer to the human kingdom by insensible gradations, for although spirit animates matter, matter likewise aids in the development of spirit. After having undergone all the transfigurations of matter, and passed through all the stages of development requisite to acquire a certain degree of intelligence, the spirit arrives at a point preparatory to the conscious spiritual state. This is the moment which your wise men, who know so little of the mysteries of nature, are unable to determine, the point where instinct ceases and reason begins. You were told that the spirit was created simple and ignorant, in allusion to the phase of existence preparatory to humanity. It is still somewhat too soon to reveal the origin of the spirit, but you may nevertheless publish what we tell you, for when your work shall be openly given to the world, incarnate spirits will be better prepared to accept what they would formerly have taken, and would even now take, for a monstrous assertion or a ridiculous absurdity. When the spirits have arrived at the point which is preparatory to humanity, they are trained for a conscious, independent and free spiritual life in worlds, suited for the purpose. At this moment the spirit passes into the state of innocence, and ignorance. The will of the sovereign master gives it the knowledge of its faculties, and consequently of its actions, and this knowledge leads to free will, independent and reasonable intelligence, and moral responsibility. When the spirit has reached this stage, it is ready to be humanized if it should fail. It is then in a state of complete innocence, having put off the instincts which were needed by the requirements of animality alone, with its last animal coverings. The statue has finally received shape. The formed spirit then clothes itself with the fluids needful for it, under the supervision of guiding spirits, and thus composes what you call the perisprit. This fluidic body then becomes the means and instrument of its constant and sustained progress from the starting point of innocence and ignorance, until it has attained to moral perfection, when it is no longer liable to any fall. But if, on the other hand, the perisprit becomes the cause of its fall, it also becomes the means of its progress by raising it through successive incarnations and reincarnations, which are expiatory at first, and ultimately glorious until it has attained to moral perfection. We have already told you, section 31, that magnetism is the universal agent. It is the great law which governs all things, and the magnetic fluids form the connecting links between all worlds, and unite all spirits, whether incarnate or not. It is the universal bond which God has given us to surround us like a single being, and to help us to ascend to Him by our united efforts. When the spirit rises from the intermediate state which precedes the life of self-consciousness, and enters into possession of free will, it accretes the fluidic covering which you call the perisprit, which forms its constitution, if we may thus employ an expression which you can understand. But there is this difference. Whereas the human constitution appears to you to be independent of the spirit which inhabits the body, the fluidic constitution is the result of the tendencies of the spirit. Fluids mutually attract each other, and the influence of similar sympathetic fluids forms the link between spirits who are animated by the same tastes and feelings, and draws them together, even if they are not of the same order. Spirits thus attract others who are similar to themselves, and sympathize with their tastes and sentiments, whether good or bad. When spirits have acquired the prerogative of free will, and are at liberty to choose for themselves, they are subject to spirits who are appointed to develop their faculties. It is then that their free will leads them to choose one path rather than another. They are more or less obedient to those who are entrusted with their guidance and development, and it is then that they are led to choose a course which may be good or evil. They may fail, or may faithfully and gradually pursue the course which is pointed out to them. Many fail, but some resist the temptations of pride and envy, and the fall of all spirits is due to pride springing from presumption and envy. A proud man is envious because he cannot bear anyone to be superior to him, he is selfish because he looks at everything as it affects himself, and he is presumptuous on account of his misplaced confidence in his own strength and intelligence. Do you not see little children manifesting signs of pride, presumption, selfishness and envy, which are the causes of the first fall? These are spirits who have already passed through ages of successive expiations and reincarnations, and are not yet purified. They try to do everything which they see you attempt, and pretend that they can do it as well as you, being misled by their misplaced confidence in themselves, and they often rebel against the wisdom of their Father, who forbids them to attempt actions beyond their strength, and which might result in serious consequences. The spirits who fail are intractable, and rebel against the authority and advice of those who are entrusted with their guidance and development. Their evil tendencies and desires attract evil spirits, who sympathize with them, but you should clearly understand that the fall is due to the act of the spirit itself, and not to its being led astray. Spirits are free to choose one course of action rather than another, and therefore act according to their own free will, and the sympathy they experience for inferior spirits, and which leads them astray, proceeds from their own disposition, and it is only after their own fall that they enter into similar conditions with the others. On the other hand, those who are obedient to their guides faithfully and gradually follow the path which is pointed out for their progress. They then attract good spirits, who sympathize with their good tendencies. Whether the spirit remains pure until it has arrived at perfection, or whether it fails, and subsequently arrives at perfection also, the fluids of the perisprit vary continually under the attractive influence of the surrounding fluids, according to the progress and tendencies of the spirit whom they clothe, and who assimilates those fluids which are most in sympathy with his intelligence and spiritual necessities. The fluids of the perisprit are dense and opaque in proportion to the inferiority of the spirit, and the nature of the perisprit is more or less pure and fluidic in proportion to his elevation. To the spirit the perisprit is matter. In the case of a fallen spirit, as of one who has remained pure, the perisprit is necessarily modified according to the phases of his existence and experiences. It is only when the spirit has attained to perfection that he is able to modify his perisprit at will, according to the needs of the moment, and to assimilate it to the regions through which he passes, and the missions with which he is entrusted by the Lord, although the purified essence of the perisprit remains unchanged. Some of the spirits who fall misuse their free will in the course of their development, others do so almost at the outset, and are obstinately proud, presumptuous, envious, disobedient and rebellious to their guides. In short, they revolt against them. When these presumptuous and rebellious spirits have fallen as low as the most material conditions of humanity, they are humanized or incarnated on the primitive worlds, to be subdued, and to progress under the restraints of the flesh. These are worlds where man has not yet appeared, but which have been prepared for his advent. Such spirits are incarnated in human substances rather than in bodies. The elements of these substances are diffused through space, and are afterwards gathered together in the planet where the incarnation is to take place, and are combined by the action of the spirits who are prepared for them. Here they are obliged to develop themselves and to progress in the course of successive ages and generations. The spirit clothed with its perisprit, acting under the supervision of the controlling spirits, attracts the elements which are needed to form its material envelope, as the lodestone attracts iron. This still results from magnetic attraction, in accordance with natural law. After its fall, and before its incarnation, the spirit constructs its perisprit according to its natural tendencies. The fluids which it has assimilated retain their influence, but these fluids change their nature during incarnation, but always correspond with the progress or the faults of the spirit. Every incarnation which results in moral improvement also leads to an improvement in the fluids which compose the perisprit. We may compare this to a peasant maiden throwing aside her coarse garments to assume the light and elegant costume of a bride. The matter with which the human spirit is burdened aids in its development, as in the case of the spiritual essence in the mineral, vegetable and animal kingdoms. Some spirits only fall after they have been obedient for ages to those who are entrusted with their guidance and development, and after they have faithfully and gradually followed the path which had been pointed out for their progress until they have attained to a greater or less degree of moral and intellectual development. They are then incorporated on more or less inferior or elevated planets, according to their degree of culpability, to undergo a more or less material or fluidic incarnation under conditions appropriate and proportioned to their fault, and to the necessities of progress corresponding to the elevation of the spirit. God continually creates worlds in infinite space and eternity appropriate to the incarnations of spirits who have fallen, as he creates the spiritual essences, or spirits themselves. The primitive material and fluidic worlds are more or less inferior or superior to one another, until you arrive at the purest fluidic planets, which you may call celestial or divine worlds, where none but pure spirits may dwell. Those spirits who are obedient to their guides faithfully pursue the course marked out for them, and continue their progress in fluidic spheres, which become gradually more and more elevated, where everything is in harmony with the spirits who inhabit them. If they remain obedient to their guides, they pass from eternity to eternity, after having undergone every phase of existence and experience requisite to lead them to perfection. When they have reached it, the influence of matter upon them has become reduced to nothing. We say matter, for the fluids of the perisprit, and those which it assimilates, are matter to the spirit. They were pure in the state of innocence and instruction, and always remain pure in the path of progress. But in order to attain to perfection they must traverse all worlds under the tutelage of the Spirit's commission to guide and develop them, in proportion to and in accordance with the conditions of their elevation, but always in the spiritual state, for they study from the great book of the universe in space. They thus visit all the spheres, the primitive, inferior and superior worlds of all degrees, which are the innumerable dwelling places of spirits who have fallen, and are undergoing successive incarnations and reincarnations, at first material, and then less and less material, or fluidic, and more fluidic, until the influence of matter upon them has become obliterated, and they also become pure spirits. The spirits who have fallen are also obliged, before arriving at perfection, and in proportion to and in accordance with the conditions of their elevation, to traverse all the worlds inhabited by spirits who have remained pure, as well as by incarnated spirits, at every stage of the spiritual scale. Their human studies suffice for the worlds which they themselves have inhabited as incarnate spirits. They study others in the errant state, between each incarnation, when they traverse all the layers of air and the worlds suspended in space, learning on the one hand and teaching on the other, but always rising towards higher regions. Jesus is one of those spirits who were pure in the state of innocence and ignorance, or of infancy and instruction. He was always obedient to the spirits who were entrusted with his guidance and development, and faithfully and gradually followed the course pointed out to him for his progress. He has thus remained pure, and having never fallen, has arrived at sidereal perfection, and become a spirit of perfect and immaculate purity. Although Jesus is the greatest spiritual essence next to God, he is not the only one. He is one of those spirits who may be called, in human language, the guard of honor of the King of Heaven. God has appointed him to be the protecting and ruling spirit of your planet. He watched over its formation and rules over it from the height of celestial splendors. He is a spirit of primitive purity, perfect and immaculate, unfallen, and, because in direct communion with God, infallible. He is your master and ours, and directs the holy phalanx of the innumerable spirits who labor at the progress of your planet, and its humanity, and he will ultimately lead you to perfection. You now understand what we implied by saying that the creation of the first man, and the genealogy of Jesus, leading back to Adam, were figurative, and that if you traced back the spiritual genealogy of Jesus, it would lead you up to God. Everything has a common origin, and proceeds from the infinitely small to the infinitely great, up to God, the point of departure and of reunion. Everything proceeds from and returns to God. Behold how everything is linked together in the vast system of the universe which the Lord has unrolled before your eyes. Behold the intermediate forms in all kingdoms of nature, linking every species together, some participating in the mineral and the vegetable, the stone and the plant, others in the plant and the animal, and others, again, in the animal and man. These are precious links which bind together and connect everything. By means of these the developing spirit passes successively through all the kingdoms and intermediate species, and thus rises from the original spiritual essence by a successive and continuous development to the stage of formed spirit, possessed of conscious, free and responsible life, having risen from the creature to man. These precious links bind everything together, that man may more easily comprehend the unity of this vast creation, so vast that human intelligence is unable to grasp it, and often refuses to acknowledge its mysteries because its mole's eyes are incapable of discovering them. We do not speak of those proud men who may feel degraded by such a revelation. Does man, the Lord of the creation, really spring from such a source, and is this his origin? The first hints of this, which have already provoked much mockery and criticism, were mingled with truth and error, that the good seed might have time to sprout, for there is always time to burn the chaff. Let not idle objectors alarm those whom the Master has commissioned us to enlighten, by saying that this would lead a man to despise the spirit which might animate the body of his son or his father. It requires a very long period, so long that you could not calculate it, before the spiritual essence which has attained to the comparative state of intelligence of an animal, can acquire the necessary development in the animal kingdom to pass to the intermediate state, and through the intermediate species, which partake of the nature of the animal and of man. After having passed through these, it again remains for a long lapse of time, which you are equally unable to estimate, in the stage preparatory to humanity, from whence the spirit arises, fully developed, by the will of the Lord, and by means of a complete transformation. Then only it receives the gift of independent, free and responsible intelligence. Everything in the vast unity of creation and of all the kingdoms of nature is linked together by natural, immutable and eternal laws. There is a reciprocal and centralizing action, affecting preservation, reproduction and destruction alike, for everything conduces to the development and progress of all creatures. Everything which exists, and lives and dies, in the mineral and vegetable kingdoms, and all the beings which live and die in the animal and human kingdoms, from the microscopic animalcule up to man, have each and all some work, use and function, leading to the development of each species, and conducing to universal life and harmony. The swarms of microscopic animalcule which are invisible to the naked eye, and which can only be rendered visible by the most powerful microscope, are diffused throughout air, water, liquids and solids. They aid in the development and maintenance of animal and human existence. For example, those which live among the grass contribute to the sustenance of the sheep and goats which crop it. No such thought troubles these creatures, any more than the sheep thinks of being slaughtered for your support. But the knife which puts an end to the life of the animal, releases the relative intelligence, or developing spirit, and allows it to be employed under more favorable conditions. It is by this spirit passing through all the mineral, vegetable and animal kingdoms, and through the intermediate forms and species which connect them, in the course of eternities of ages, that it is developed by continual progression, until at length thought and moral existence commence. But you would fall into a grievous error if you were to suppose that you must destroy what exists around you to assist in its development. Everything must live for its own and the general good. Therefore destroy no more than what is absolutely necessary for your existence, and let the wisdom of the Lord alone provide for the rest. When man comprehends the links which bind everything in creation together, his heart will be softened, and he will understand the necessity of using everything without abusing it. Everything in this vast unity of creation exists, is born, lives, moves, dies, and is reborn, according to the universal spiritual action which is guided by the will of God, under the action of the immutable laws of nature which he has established from all eternity. Be well assured that there is nothing spontaneous in nature, for the origin of everything is prepared beforehand. Man can only comprehend phenomena which appeal to his senses, and it seems to him that everything which appears suddenly, without his foreseeing the cause, is a new and spontaneous creation, but the germs existed previously. Man perceives only matter, but the intelligence fitted to inhabit it is placed there as soon as the matter is fitted to contain it, and life appears at once to the eyes of man, under forms appropriate to the medium and the surrounding influences, under the secret direction and supervision of watchful spirits, and according to general laws of nature which man cannot yet understand or explain. O men, whom we love so much, we desire your welfare, and we would destroy the demon which possesses you, pride, which is your deadliest enemy. Let not pride lead you to reject this revelation of your humble origin without examination. Say not that it degrades you, but rather that it exalts you, by aiding you better to comprehend the grandeur of your Creator. We also, like yourselves, and all but he who was from all eternity, and will exist to all eternity, have originally commenced our existence as a spiritual essence or principle of intelligence, and our developing spirits have passed through all these metamorphoses and transfigurations of matter before arriving at the state of formed spirit, gifted with the knowledge of its desires, faculties and actions, and thus rendered an independent, free and responsible creature by the possession of free will. We do not teach you metempsychosis, but simply reveal the natural law of equality before God of all that exists, and of everything which your senses can perceive. God is a Father who is uniformly tender to his children, and has no favorites, all are his creatures, and none will be disinherited. Oh, that you could understand the height and depth of this endless chain which binds all nature into one whole. Would that this might awaken the love of man by showing him the infinite love of his God. Let not skeptics and sophists find fault, and let not would-be philosophers without philosophy deny, but let them examine our words with unprejudiced minds. If you are filled with love and reverence for your Creator, and love and charity towards all your fellow men, and towards all the creatures of the Lord, fortify your hearts with the love of knowledge and the desire for progress, and seek to understand with heartfelt humility and disinterestedness, and you will understand. Seek for light, and you shall receive light. God sends good spirits to the aid of those who labor patiently, and they will aid you to perceive and know, for there is nothing hidden which shall not be revealed, and nothing unknown which shall not be known. The studies of one man will be useful to aid another to advance in knowledge and love. Moreover, you will be helping yourselves, for reincarnation opens the way to man to resume his incomplete and unfinished labors. And when the light has shone upon you, then you will raise yourselves towards your Creator in a transport of holy rapture, exclaiming praise to God. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, with the concurrence of the apostles. Section 57. How is the spirit which has arrived at the preparatory period to humanity led to the state of formed spirit, or of intelligent, free and responsible individuality? And how do pride and envy cause its fall, after it has once been gifted with free will, the knowledge of its faculties, and freedom of action? When the spirit has passed through animal matter, and has attained to a certain degree of development, it needs to remain in an intermediate state before commencing its spiritual life. It cannot enter upon an active, conscious and independent existence until it has freed itself entirely from its forced contact with the flesh. It must forget and cleanse itself from its relations to matter, and it is at this period that the transformation from instinct to conscious intelligence is effected. When the spirit is sufficiently developed in the animal state, it is restored, in a manner, to the universal whole, but under special conditions. It is led to worlds in course of formation, preparatory regions, where it must find the medium, in which the constituent principles of the perisprit are formed. It is then like a feeble ray of light in the midst of dense masses of vapor which encompass it on all sides. The spirit loses consciousness of its existence, for the influence of matter upon it must be destroyed during this state of stagnation. It falls into a condition which we may call lethargy, to make it intelligible to you, and during this period the perisprit which is intended to receive the spiritual principle, is developed around this spark of true life. Its form is undefined at first, but it gradually attains to perfection, like the germ in its mother's womb, and passes through all the various stages of development, and the spirit awakes from its stupor when its envelope is prepared for it, and utters its first cry of admiration at the glorious universe around. In this stage the perisprit of the spirit is completely fluidic even to our eyes, and the flame within it, the spiritual essence of life, is so pale that it is difficult for our senses, acute as they are, to distinguish it. This is the state of spiritual infancy. After this the great spirits who watch over the education of spirits in the stage of simplicity, ignorance and innocence, lead them towards the fluidic sphere where they must dwell during their moral and intellectual development until they have acquired the full use of their powers, and are thus enabled to choose their own course. The spirit passes through the phases of infancy, and its protecting guardians teach it the meaning of the free will which God has entrusted to it. They explain the use which it can make of it, and warn it against the dangers which it may encounter. The first lesson which they teach it is the love and gratitude which it owes to the great being. It is then gradually led on to study the fluids which surround it, and the spheres which it is able to perceive. Its experienced guides lead it towards the regions where worlds are in course of formation, that it may study their mysteries, and at length it descends towards the inferior regions to learn to direct the organic principles of all that exists in the various kingdoms of nature. From these it passes on to higher spheres, where it learns to direct the atmospheric and telluric phenomena which you perceive without comprehending them, and it thus passes from study to study, and from progress to progress, until it attains to that infinite knowledge which enables it to approach its sovereign master. But spirits are at liberty to make either a good or bad use of their free will when it has attained its full development. They may follow their own course either at the starting point, or at a more or less advanced stage of their experience, and are then given over to their own devices, like yourselves, that is, they refuse to submit to the friendly influence of their guides who surround them, like the affectionate relatives of a youth who would save him from the dangers of life, and they must then suffer a terrible apprenticeship of free will. Everything is so beautiful in the superior regions, and such magnificent objects are revealed to the gaze of the spirit, that it is dazzled and blinded. Then its instincts awake, and pride or envy nearly always attends the noble ambition of learning and succeeding. At this stage the spirit feels the paternal influence of the God whose existence is revealed to it, but cannot see him. Nothing but what is perfect can approach perfection, and although the spirit is free and independent, it is still ignorant, and has not yet made trial of its own powers. Spirits in the state of infancy are entrusted to masters who labor at the mental and moral development of their pupils both by precept and example. If the pupils laboriously follow the path of spiritual progress, and work ardently at their development, in obedience to their guides, they grow in wisdom, purity and knowledge, and thus, without having fallen, arrive at a point where the central light is veiled from them no longer. Or else they trust in their own powers, neglect the advice which is given them, and are overwhelmed at the sight of the splendor surrounding the great spirits, and yield to pride or envy. Pride overcomes them because they already wield great power over the inferior regions, which they are learning to govern. Under the direction of the spirits entrusted with their education, and the special protector of the planet, they learn to direct the revolutions of the seasons and the fertility of the soil, and guide the incarnate spirits by their secret influence, but if they believe that the authority which they possess is due to their own merits, they disregard the advice of their guides and fall. Envy misleads them, because they do not always understand the powerful action of God. They refuse to admit that there is a spiritual hierarchy, and they charge their Creator with injustice. You must always remember that God alone creates. These poor blind ones in the midst of light sometimes even fall into atheism, incredible as it may appear. In this case especially, atheism is the offspring of pride, for as they cannot see Him who has originated all things, they deny His existence, and regard themselves as both the base and summit of the edifice. It is then that their chastisement is most severe, for they are doomed to primitive human incarnation, and it is absolutely necessary for their own good that these guilty ones should suffer heavily from the hand whose existence they have denied. Pride, envy, or atheism thus cause their fall, and they are cast into the dark places of human incarnation, according to their degree of culpability, under circumstances corresponding to their need of expiation and progress. Do not misunderstand what we have told you of the action of these spirits who are progressing without having yet failed, and who assemble in the inferior regions to guide the incarnate spirits by influencing them as friendly guardians. The guardian angels of spirits incarnated on the inferior worlds are spirits of your own order, but, as you may suppose, purer than those whom they protect, and these likewise have their guides and protectors, to whom they pay good heed, for everything is connected together from the base to the summit in a hierarchy of love and union. Section 58. You say that those spirits who are about to be humanized, and have fallen sufficiently low, are cast down to the primitive worlds, where man has not yet appeared, but which are already prepared for his advent, and that they are there incarnated in human substances, rather than bodies. In what conditions do these human substances exist? They are rudimentary bodies. Man arrives on earth in a rudimentary condition, like everything which is formed on the primitive worlds. The male and female are neither strong nor developed nor intelligent, and can scarcely drag about their gross and shapeless bodies. They live, like animals, on whatever they find suitable for them on the ground. The trees and soil bring forth abundance for the food of every species, and the carnivorous animals do not attack them, for the providence of God watches over the preservation of all. They have no instincts but hunger and the necessity of reproduction, but succeeding generations gradually become more developed, their form improves, and they are placed in a dwelling which answers to their increasing requirements. But we need not now detail the history of creation to you. The Spirit comes to inhabit bodies formed of substances contained in the materials of which the planet is composed, but these elements are so arranged that the Spirit can use and appropriate them. We might better compare them to fleshy fungi, and you may form an idea of the human creation by studying the shapeless larvae which live on various plants. Their body forms a nearly inert mass, composed of materials which are still soft and imperfectly combined, and they crawl or rather glide along, for even their limbs are almost rudimentary. O men! This is your origin and starting point, when pride, envy, or even atheism in the midst of light, followed by disobedience and revolt, have led you to fall into conditions which degrade you to primitive human incarnation. Do not turn away your eyes with horror, but rather bless the Lord who permits you to look up to Him, and to behold the image of perfection in the radiant spirits who shine around Him. But these primitive human incarnations, or their causes, are not to be regarded as arising from the fierce vengeance of an insulted deity. God does not avenge himself, why should he? But his wise providence places the proud spirit who believes himself to be the moving power of the universe in a position where he can experience his own weakness. He is like a parent who has permitted his presumptuous child to try to lift the weight that he sees his father carry, and then allows him to exert his strength little by little, to teach him the use of it. Horrible as these incarnations may appear, they are nevertheless of immense benefit to the fallen spirit, who is thus forced to pass through the phases and under the yoke of the very matter of which he supposed himself to be the master. Thus he learns fully to realize his own weakness, and acquires the strength, skill and experience in which he was deficient, through exercise and conflict. But the punishment of the spirit is the means of his regeneration, for he would remain vicious were he not subjected to this terrible experience, and if he still retained his power, he would exert it contrary to the universal harmony, which is impossible. It is therefore only paternal providence which condemns the spirit to suffer these incarnations solely with a view to the advancement which he may deserve, and they may be indefinitely shortened and lightened by his zeal, repentance, and docility. The providence of the Lord watches over the preservation of all beings. The species which are incapable of defending themselves are not attacked in a positive manner. They have enemies, it is true, but their enemies are as weak as themselves, and are not species which could destroy them utterly, without their having any means of defense or flight. Every species seeks the nourishment which is suitable for it, and avoids that for which it feels no appetite. Man has no enemies to fear in the state of primitive and rudimentary incarnation, any more than the fungus, which is only devoured by insects when it has reached the limit of its material existence. No carnivorous or herbivorous animal, nor any kind of bird or fish, will feed upon him. The carnivorous animals do not begin to attack man until he is no longer defenseless, or without means of escape, and as regards herbivorous animals, they would not attack the hunter unless they themselves attracted his pursuit. Matter follows a regular course of development, but spirits need not traverse all its phases, if they rise above them. There will always be classes of spirits corresponding to the different degrees of incarnation. The transition from the state of primitive incarnation to the human form is effected by the development of the unique type in the germ. The type is one, but is modified by its surroundings, and hence you may deduce conclusions regarding the formation of the spirit in the various kingdoms of nature. Just as the origin of the human type arises from plastic and fecundated slime, so is it likewise with the principle of the first plants and animals. Microscopic plants are developed, which grow and spread on, or under the soil. They produce seeds which are carried to different places, and are modified by the various influences of the surrounding soil, water, heat, and fluids. Then the animal types are born, which pass through similar transformations, and follow a similar course of development, brought about by similar causes. You should understand why and how man is enabled to acquire the direction and supremacy over the planet, although when he is first incarnated, the animal races have attained a degree of material development superior to that of the humanized spirit. The progress of man has not been hastened, but retarded. As a physical retrogression has taken place, his intelligence must be roused afresh, whereas in animals it requires to be developed. You must clearly understand that when a new planet is created, its inherent principle of intelligence, or latent spiritual principle, requires to be elaborated, developed, individualized, and regulated. The latent principle must pass through an innumerable series of transformations before attaining this end, but the incarnate spirit, on the contrary, is cast back into matter to undergo its constraint, and to accustom it to conquer matter, and to control itself, and when the intelligent spirit has already passed through a certain series of stages, it can, if it desires, rapidly reascend to the regions from which it has been banished, and to the lofty spheres to which it ought to attain. In such a case there is no longer the slow and almost insensible progress of creating, as it were, a new spiritual being, but the acquisition of an intelligent lesson, the first principles of which are already learned, and which it is only necessary to apply. We may compare the spirit which has already been trained in the various inferior kingdoms, mineral, vegetable, and animal, to a child who is developed, born, and gradually trained up to youth, but at this point he is seized with a dreadful illness, which prevents him from remembering anything when he recovers. His limbs will no longer support his tottering frame, he cannot move from one spot to another, he utters inarticulate sounds, unintelligible to those around him, and his favorite authors, his talents, and his recollections are dead to him. But little by little his strength returns, and his patient mother guides the steps of her child, aids his utterance, shows him the words in books which he has forgotten, and leads him back to his former studies. His intelligence quickly expands anew, and everything which he learns is a recollection. He believes he knows it, and gradually remembers it, and the progress which he makes is rapid in proportion to the improvement in his health. Thus it is with the fallen spirit. His spiritual progress is proportioned to the attention which he pays to his moral health, and this allows him to make rapid advances in the remembrance of his past acquisitions, which he believes to be fresh studies, until he has arrived at a point when the past can be unrolled before his eyes without inconvenience. He can make no fresh progress, which will then be really a new study, until he has arrived at the point which he quitted when he fell into the dark places of human incarnation. Section 59. What are we to think of the theory which asserts that the incarnation of the formed spirit on the primitive and other earths until it has attained perfection, is not the punishment of a fault, but a necessity, as in the case of a spirit in course of development in the inferior kingdoms? Human incarnation is not a necessity, but a punishment, and the punishment cannot precede the fault. We have also explained to you that the spirit is only humanized when its previous faults have rendered it liable to human incarnation, and it is then fitted for it, and is compelled to suffer the consequences. This theory has been stated as follows: according to a theory which appears plausible at first sight, spirits have not been created for material incarnation, and their human materialization results from their own fault. This alone is enough to condemn the system, for if no spirit had fallen, there would be no men in this world, or in any other, and as the presence of man is needful for the material improvement of worlds, since he aids the general work by his intelligence and activity, and is consequently one of the indispensable adjuncts of creation, God could not make the completion of his work dependent upon the eventual fall of his creatures, unless, indeed, he depended on there being a sufficient number of guilty spirits to people the worlds which have been and will be created, and such an idea is repugnant to common sense. You may omit the last clause of the sentence. Common sense, on the contrary, would teach you that the omniscience of God enables him to foresee that among the number of those whom he has created weak, simple, ignorant, but possessed of free will, there will always be some who will allow themselves to be seduced by the pride which springs from ignorance, and which leads to presumption, selfishness, and envy, and who will fall because they abuse their free will. Is it more reasonable to suppose that God, who is represented to you as the type of all perfection, and the paragon of justice through all eternity, should have created feeble creatures expressly that they might gain strength by painful experience, and that he has created innocent beings in order to teach them to practice innocence by murder, outrage, and all the vices of the primitive human incarnations, vices which would then be inherent in the creature when it issued from the hands of the Creator? So that the thousands of ages which have passed have not been able to perfect it. The impetuous torrent of time has rolled unceasingly over these rough and rugged boulders without being able to polish the surface, since so many outrages still afflict humanity, even at the present day. God would then have given arbitrary freedom to the spirit on condition that its freedom should be subject to the uniform law of sin, and would thus inflict the same punishment of human incarnation upon the spirit who remained obedient to those entrusted with his guidance and development in the state of innocence and ignorance, and has followed the course marked out for his progress steadily and obediently, as upon the disobedient, proud, presumptuous, selfish, or envious spirit, who became guilty and rebellious, and fell, by the abuse of his free will. Not so, God is great, just, good, and paternal. He has willed that his children should be born in simplicity of heart, and he has granted them freedom of action which they nearly always misuse. Then God, still leaving the spirit the use of its free will, withdraws himself from it to some extent, and abandons it to its own impressions. It then chooses its own course, and it is then, and then only, that it suffers the consequences of its choice. All will come in time, and this truth will become plain like those of reincarnation, and the pre-existence of the soul. Everything prepares the way, one generation sows the seed, another reaps, and the third gathers in the harvest. The omniscience of God enables him to foresee, the past, present, and future being always unrolled before him, that nothing shall ever be wanting to the universal life and harmony, and that there will always be a sufficient number of guilty spirits to dwell upon the worlds which he creates for their habitation, where they must expiate their offenses, advance, and contribute to the material improvement of these worlds. The omniscience of God also enables him to foresee from all eternity that there will always be a sufficient number of spirits who were pure in the state of innocence and ignorance, and who obey their guides, and remain pure in the path of progress which is pointed out to them, without falling, to people all the fluidic worlds which he creates, and which are appropriate for the intelligences who are destined to dwell there, and to continue their progress in the fluidic state. The author we have quoted continues, human incarnation is a necessity to the spirit, who accomplishes his providential mission, and works at his own advancement with the activity and intelligence which are necessary for his life and well-being, but human incarnation becomes a punishment when the spirit has neglected its duty, and is forced to begin its task afresh, and to multiply its corporeal existences, which have become painful to it by its own fault. A scholar can only obtain his degree after passing through all the preliminary examinations, and these examinations are not a punishment but a necessity, but he is punished, if his idleness compels him to repeat them, although the ability to pass them is a reward. It is therefore true that terrestrial incarnation is a punishment to many of its inhabitants, because they might have avoided it, whereas they have perhaps doubled, tripled, or quadrupled it by their own fault, and have thus retarded their entrance into better worlds. But it is false, in principle, to admit that human incarnation is a punishment. On the contrary, it is false to assert that human incarnation is necessary for the fully developed spirit, in the stage of innocence and ignorance, and gifted with free will which he has never abused. If he has never fallen, and remained obedient to his guides, it is unnecessary, whereas it is a necessity to the disobedient, guilty, and rebellious spirit, who has abused his free will and fallen. It is, therefore, false to assert that human incarnation is not, in principle, a punishment, being rendered necessary in consequence of a fault. Those who drew up this erroneous proposition were either not sufficiently instructed, or have not reflected sufficiently on the nature and object of the worlds which are inhabited by incarnate spirits as worlds of expiation and progress, and on the origin of the spirit, its different stages of formation, and especially on the two well-marked conditions which must be very carefully distinguished from each other. In the one case the spirit is in course of formation, and advances continually, until it becomes a fully developed spirit possessed of independent intelligence, free will, the knowledge of its wishes and powers, and the realization of the liberty and consequent responsibility of its acts. In the other case the spirit is fully developed in the state of innocence and ignorance, and able either to use its free will to follow the path of progress with simplicity of heart, or to abuse it under the influence of pride, presumption, and envy, and consequently to be disobedient, guilty, and rebellious. It is thus free to stand or fall. Incarnation is necessary to spirit in course of formation. It is indispensable to its progress and development, to awaken and gradually develop the knowledge of its existence, which can only be effected through contact with matter. Intellectual development is due to the union of these two principles. Incarnation is a necessity until the spirit arrives at the point of intellectual development, and is ready to receive the precious but dangerous gift of free will. We will now recapitulate what we have told you already, section 56. All spirits originally start from the same point. They are primarily formed of the essence of fluids which are so ethereal that no words could convey any idea of it to your limited intelligence. This is animated by the will of God to give it being, and constitutes the spiritual essence or intelligent principle, destined to progress until it becomes a fully developed spirit, gifted with free will, and possessed of knowledge of its wishes, powers, and actions. Incarnation, or rather materialization, of this spiritual essence in dead matter takes place, first in the mineral kingdom and in the intermediate species partaking of the nature of the mineral and the plant, and then in the vegetable kingdom, and in the intermediate species which partake of the nature of the plant and the animal. It thus follows a continuously progressive course, and attains a development which leads it on to the borders of the knowledge of life. It is then incarnated in the animal kingdom, and subsequently in the species which are intermediate between the animal and man, so far as the material envelope is concerned. This continuous progress leads to the knowledge of active external life and its surroundings, and this intellectual development leads the spirit in course of formation to the preparatory period which precedes the attainment of that moral, independent, and responsible life which constitutes free thought. When the spirits have arrived at the point of intellectual development, and receive the precious but dangerous gift of free will, they are all equally in the state of innocence and ignorance, and are clothed with a perisprit which covers the independent intelligence. They all undergo the fluidic incarnation which is constituted by this perisprit, and which may be called an envelope, from your material point of view. They are all pure in the state of innocence and ignorance, and are subject to spirits who are entrusted with their guidance and development. They have freedom of action, and may consequently advance in the fluidic state, so as to pass from the stage of infancy and instruction to perfection by means of successive and continuous progress, like the student who is always obedient and attentive to the authority, advice, and lessons of his master, and passes all his examinations until he takes his degree. They may, on the contrary, commit some fault, and thus bring upon themselves the punishment due to the guilty, but to the guilty alone, like the scholar who is disobedient and rebellious, and thus by his own fault brings on himself the punishment of expulsion, and is placed in a reformatory where he must pass his examinations among different conditions and surroundings until he also has taken his degree. Many spirits fail, for nearly all abuse their free will, but some are obedient to those who are appointed to guide and develop them, and follow the path marked out for their progress. Those who fail suffer a punishment which they might have avoided. As soon as they are prepared to suffer the consequences of their fault by being humanized, they are subjected to human incarnation according to their degree of culpability, and under conditions suitable to their need of expiation and progress, either on the primitive worlds or on other worlds inhabited by spirits who have failed. Human incarnation, in principle, is the punishment of the first fault which has led to a fall. Reincarnation is the punishment of backsliding, or a fresh fall, for all your existences are connected together, and every reincarnated spirit carries with him the secret penalty of his preceding incarnation. Spirits who are obedient to those who are entrusted with their guidance and development do not fall, but continue their progress in the fluidic state. Both those who have fallen, and those who have remained pure, work at their own advancement by their activity and intelligence, and accomplish their providential mission in the great unity of creation. Everything is reciprocal, and all spirits are linked together that they may raise themselves to God by wisdom, knowledge and love, according to the general laws of progress. The spirits who have fallen display their activity and intelligence in the state of incarnation, by preserving their life and well-being, and ultimately by the material improvement of the worlds which they inhabit. This is the material side, but they also labor at their moral and intellectual advancement, and at the moral and intellectual development of the human races which people these worlds. Material incarnation is a punishment necessary for expiation and progress, and is succeeded by less and less material incarnations in more and more elevated worlds, for matter follows the progress of the spirit. The incarnations then become more and more fluidic, until the spirit has purified itself from all contact with the flesh, and returns to the superior regions, passing through the layers of air and worlds, learning on the one hand, and teaching on the other. The spirits who remain pure also employ their activity and intelligence, to progress from the state of innocence and ignorance, infancy and instruction, to perfection. They are obliged to make great spiritual efforts to progress without falling, in the fluidic state, for the perisprit is matter to them, and renders their labor great, constant, and difficult, for although the perisprit is the means and instrument of their progress, it may also be the cause of their fall at any moment. It is actually so in the case of a spirit who has failed, and may be the cause of a fresh fall at any time, although it is the means and instrument of his progress in the human incarnations. Unfallen spirits exercise their activity and intelligence in proportion to the elevation which they have acquired by study and labor, in the maintenance of universal life and harmony, but always in the spiritual state, in worlds inhabited by incarnate spirits who have failed, and in worlds inhabited by spirits in the errant state, everywhere in space. The worlds are infinitely numerous. Their number and multiplication would astound you, and nothing could enable you, in the limited state of your intelligence, to understand their extent, but spirits are far more numerous. When spirits have arrived at a certain degree of moral and intellectual development, both those who have hitherto remained unfallen, and those who have already fallen, are required to study the principles and organization of worlds. They commence these studies under the direction of perfectly pure spirits, whose origin is lost in the darkness of past eternities, and under their guidance they construct and develop the planets, and lead them from sphere to sphere towards the regions which are fitted for them. At this moment many of them fall, either seduced by pride, and overlooking the directing hand of the Lord, or they question his power by mistrusting their own. The time of the human incarnation of the Spirit, according to his fault, has then arrived, but the planet is not allowed to perish because the first architect has failed, but continues its progress under the supervision of a superior spirit, who takes the place of the fallen spirit, and continues his work. We have been speaking of spirits who have already attained to some degree of knowledge, and are entrusted with the formation of planets, but even before arriving at this point many are hurled from the ether into gross matter, many turn aside at the very entrance of the path, and many have neither the courage to make the needful efforts nor to persevere after the first attempt. But never forget that all spirits, whether fallen or unfallen, were originally equal at their starting point, and will also be equal when they reach their goal. They will be equal in purity when they have become pure spirits, although they have pursued different paths, because it is rendered to each according to his works. Section 60. You here told us that Mary and Joseph were both perfect spirits, but that Joseph was less elevated than Mary, while both were inferior to Jesus. What is the exact meaning of this, and why are some inferior to others in perfection? God alone is perfect from all eternity. He alone is possessed of absolute perfection, and universal and infinite love and knowledge. He alone can say, I will go no further, because he has attained the absolute limits of perfection from all eternity. It is he alone who has always existed, and having always known everything, has nothing to learn. The created spirit can never equal God, and as everything in the infinite vastness of the universe is always tending to progress, the spirit, whatever may be its intellectual advancement, has always more and more to learn, throughout the eternities. Intellectual progress is therefore indefinite, for every spirit has always something to learn in universal knowledge, without ever finding any limits. Moral perfection is relative. Like intellectual progress. A spirit may be morally and intellectually perfect, relative to worlds inferior to that which he inhabits. A spirit may stand very high in the spiritual hierarchy as compared with yourselves, and may be morally and intellectually perfect as regards your planet, and may yet be very far from having attained the culminating point of perfection. He may still have to advance very far in universal knowledge before reaching it, and it is these whom you call superior spirits. A spirit is perfect as compared to you and your planet when he has succeeded in subduing all human passions, and in divesting himself of all impurity of thought, and, consequently, of action. Such a spirit is animated by the most ardent and devoted love for all the creatures of the Lord, and is filled with reverence and adoration towards his Creator. He has reached the apex of love and devotion, but not of knowledge. The culminating point of perfection is sidereal perfection. A spirit has attained to this when he has attained to moral and intellectual perfection relative to the higher or lower worlds, both material or fluidic, which are inhabited by fallen or unfallen spirits, until they have attained to the purely fluidic worlds, where the essence of the perispirit is completely purified, when the influence of matter over the spirit has become completely nullified, and it is no longer liable to incarnation upon any planet whatever. Sidereal perfection is only attained by pure spirits, but even these are not possessed of unlimited knowledge, for this belongs to God alone, and not even to those spirits whose knowledge is nearest to his, for no created spirit can ever equal God. When the pure spirit has attained to moral infallibility, he is only intellectually infallible relatively, and through the aid of others, when he is deficient in some branches of knowledge which are necessary for the accomplishment of any mission, because, although he is morally perfect relatively to all spirits whomsoever, it is the will of God that he should always be aided and sustained by those who are his superiors in knowledge. The hierarchy of knowledge among the pure spirits, who are all equally pure, is only a principle of assistance proceeding from God alone, the sole source from whence all merit and power proceeds, and to whom it returns. But you may be very sure that although the pure spirit may still have much to learn before arriving at the extreme limits of universal knowledge in space, he is always morally and intellectually perfect, relatively to the planets which he visits. God is the eternal essence of all life, the supreme intelligence, and uncreated creator, the first cause. Sovereignly, intelligent, and omnipotent. The pure spirits are intermediate between God and the superior spirits who are the ministers of the divine will, and thus act upon yourselves, by the mediation of good spirits, according to the spiritual hierarchy. These have all various tasks assigned them, and aid in the preparation, development, and guidance of everything which conduces to the universal life and harmony in all worlds whatever, whether inhabited by fallen or unfallen spirits, according to the natural and immutable laws which God has established in space. Every world whatever has a protecting and ruling spirit, a Christ of God, the origin of whose perfection is lost in the darkness of bygone eternities, and who is infallible and unfallen. He has presided over the formation of his world, and is entrusted with its development and progress, and with that of all the spirits who inhabit it, that he may lead them to perfection. The missions of these Christs of God are relative to the degree and development of the planet. They preach love to such ungrateful worlds as yours, but in more elevated worlds they teach great discoveries, arts, and sciences. In all, they labor to awaken the sleeping instincts, according to the necessities and capacities of the planets which they direct. The Christs of God fulfill their missions with equal zeal, whatever may be the inferiority or superiority of the worlds which they govern, whether upon Mars, upon your Earth, or Venus, or on Jupiter. Those spirits who have arrived at sidereal perfection, after having fallen and been purified, always regard those who have arrived at the same perfection without falling, with a species of love and reverence. But do not suppose that there is any line of demarcation between those who have fallen and those who have remained pure. Not so, they are equal in purity, devotion, and love. Let the men of your planet contend about the hierarchy of precedence and the inequality of social conditions. In the sight of God, whatever is equally pure, is equal. We have said that the protecting and ruling spirits of the planets are infallible and unfallen. They are infallible because they are in direct and conscious sympathy with God, and receive his inspirations and wishes, and they are likewise superior in universal knowledge to the spirits who have also become pure after having fallen. Do not think that there is any partiality in this. God is all justice, and is incapable of partiality, but the spiritual hierarchy is based upon the elevation and progress of spirits. You can understand that the spirit who has pursued a uniform course ever since his origin, must always be further advanced in universal knowledge than the spirit who has become purified after having fallen, and it is natural that the most important missions in nature should be entrusted to the most advanced spirits. We will now explain in what sense Mary and Joseph were both perfect spirits when they incarnated themselves on a mission. They were perfect spirits relative to you, for they were both morally and intellectually perfect as regards your planet, but not so, relatively to worlds superior to those which they had inhabited. They were superior spirits, and were very high in the spiritual hierarchy in comparison with yourselves, but they had not yet attained to the culminating point of perfection. They were good and devoted spirits, but had still much universal knowledge to acquire before attaining to sidereal perfection. They were both spirits who had not remained pure, but who had been purified. Mary had undergone a semi-material incarnation on an elevated planet. We call it semi-material because the body was fluidic, thus participating in the nature of the perisprit. You cannot understand the nature of these fluidic bodies in the superior worlds, any more than that of the perisprit, as long as you are not in a position to understand the nature of the fluids of which they are composed. Strictly speaking, the perisprit may be called semi-material, because, though itself fluidic, it can materialize itself at will. As compared with what you call matter, it is as vapor compared to water, matter etherealized, but still matter, and capable of assuming a compact appearance at times. You will only be able to understand this when your intelligence is sufficiently developed to penetrate the depths of ether which surround you. In order to estimate the qualities of the air, you have analyzed, weighed, and measured it. The air was always around you, and yet how long you have required to accomplish even this. Before you can understand the fluids which are diffused through space, and may be said to compose it, you must learn to rise into the regions where these fluids disengage heterogeneous particles. But before this, the science of aerostatics must have attained its acme of perfection, and as yet it is only passing through the first stages of its infancy. How many fruitless efforts have been already made to perfect it, and how many are yet to follow? Man will one day be master of the air as he is of the earth and water, and he will then only be able to understand it, because he will be able to study it. At present you see only the difficulties of guiding yourselves and of breathing, but these will be overcome. Before men can ascend to these elevated regions, it will be necessary for them to guard against the want of air to support life, and against currents which would be poisonous to humanity. These are great difficulties, but man's intelligence was given him to be used. The horizon continually expands before him to incite him to unceasing progress. Let him advance without fear, for the studies of one man will be useful to others as well as to himself when the time has come. God wills that others should aid you, but that you yourselves should also work. If man arms himself with the love of knowledge, and the desire of progress, he will be sustained by good spirits, and will one day attain a perfect knowledge of the matter around him. After this, the matter which envelopes him will itself become modified to administer to his new requirements, and he will pass from study to study, and from progress to progress, until he shall attain to those happy regions where he will acquire all knowledge relating to your planet, and the solar system. Any comparison between the objects in your world and those in higher worlds must be incomplete, but if you would compare the fluidic bodies of the higher planets with matter which changes its nature under your eyes, you may compare the human body of your planet to water, and that of certain other planets to steam. Steam is still water, but water in such a condition that it can rise into the air and mingle with the clouds, instead of needing any support. During the successive incarnations which follow yours, the body gradually loses its density, and becomes more and more aerial. The feet no longer adhere to the ground, and the body no longer needs to be carefully balanced. The higher planets are surrounded with an atmosphere corresponding with their nature, and just as seawater floats a body more readily than fresh, thus the density of the air of these regions is greater than that of the bodies of the mortals who inhabit them. The fault which Mary committed was very slight, even in comparison to the elevation which she had already attained without falling. It was so slight that you would be unable to see the least trace of a fault in it, but much is expected from those to whom much is given. Mary was incarnated on one of those blessed worlds on which you rest your hopes. For you, poor unhappy creatures, it would indeed be an enviable recompense for which you should strain all your efforts, but this incarnation was nevertheless a punishment to Mary, for she left a more beautiful world. You may compare this to the case of a man who has had a competency left him, after having always lived in the greatest poverty. He is able to procure the ordinary pleasures of life, and rejoices in his good fortune. But it is otherwise with the man who has been cradled in a golden couch, all whose fancies have been satisfied, and who had no desire which was not immediately gratified. Is he not unhappy when he sees his resources fail, is forced to compound with his creditors, and loses part of his fortune? For he knows that he has committed a fault, and that he himself is to blame for what he has lost. But as any comparison between earthly things and those of higher worlds must be faulty, we wish you to accept the spirit and not the letter of our explanations. Mary was purified by this incarnation, and without falling again, she resumed the simple and direct path of progress, which she is still following. She has not yet attained to the culminating point of sidereal perfection, but notwithstanding this, her present incarnations, a material term which we employ to make you understand her perispiritic condition, are so far above your comprehension that you could not form any idea of them. Joseph had fallen more seriously, and had first suffered several incarnations on your earth, and had subsequently been purified by successive incarnations in higher and higher worlds, when he incarnated himself to aid Jesus in his earthly mission. His present elevation is great, and he is a superior spirit, though his knowledge is inferior to that of Mary. Both Mary and Joseph are spirits very far inferior to Jesus. They are spirits who are morally and intellectually perfect with reference to you and your planet, but have still to advance very far in universal knowledge before arriving at sidereal perfection. After they have attained it, and become pure spirits, they must still advance continually in knowledge, for no spirit can ever exhaust its limits. Everything in universal nature is always progressing, but this is too far above your limited intelligence to be intelligible to you. Jesus is a spirit of perfect and immaculate purity, and one of the greatest spiritual essences next to God. His knowledge is so vast that your limited intelligence could form no idea of it, and even the superior spirits cannot comprehend its extent. An innumerable company of pure spirits admire his knowledge, and labor to acquire it throughout the eternities, but even Jesus himself was still studying when he descended among you, although he was then the very type of love and wisdom. He is still studying, even now, for the Spirit knows no end but progress, and only God can say I will go no further, for he alone has attained the supreme limit from all eternity. Do not suppose from this that Jesus had, or could have, any trials. He was and is unfallen and infallible, for he is in constant and direct sympathy with God, because his perfect purity enables him to approach the center of all purity. He was and is his word to you, and may be called your God in the sense that he is your master and king, through and for his God and your God, his Father and your Father, for he is the protecting and ruling spirit of your planet. He was, and ever is, inspired by the love of progress, and labors incessantly to acquire fresh knowledge in the book of infinity, for God alone has nothing to learn. When your planet was entrusted to Jesus, he was a pure spirit, unfallen and infallible, but he has increased his own knowledge by working at the progress of your earth, and his ascending course corresponds with yours, for God rewards the love and devotion of every spirit, however advanced he may be, by giving him more and more knowledge in return for the progress which he has effected. Consequently, the personal progress of every spirit corresponds with the progress which he helps his brethren to accomplish. The love and devotion of Jesus cause him to constantly make still more ardent efforts to lead you on the path that you should follow to perfection. Your earth originally sprang from incandescent and impure fluids, and gradually attained its material condition by successive phases of planetary revolutions. It will pass through phases of new revolutions, from material to less and less material, and finally fluidic conditions, until it becomes purely fluidic. Then Jesus himself, though always a perfectly pure spirit, will be superior in knowledge to what he had attained when he presided over the formation of the globe, or when he visited it 18 centuries ago, or to what he now possesses in consequence of his devotion to you. Everything which has been, is, or will be, in all the kingdoms of nature on your planet, follows an ascending course in the path of physical, moral and intellectual progress, under the operation of spirit action, according to the eternal and immutable laws of God. But during the great work of the purification of your planet and its humanity, the chaff will be separated from the wheat, at the time predicted for the regeneration of your world, when it can no longer be the dwelling place of any but good spirits. The spirits who remain obstinately guilty or rebellious will be removed, and banished to inferior planets, where they will have to expiate their persistence in evil and their willful blindness throughout long ages. Mary and Joseph, like ourselves, Continue to aid Jesus in his mission by assisting you to accomplish your destiny under his direction. You can understand that when you are about to attain to perfection, the spirits belonging to the band who aided Jesus in his earthly mission will have attained to sidereal perfection, and taken their rank among the pure spirits. The revelation of the revelation. The four Gospels explained by their writers by Jean-Baptiste Roustaing, 1881. Source: www.tinyurl.com/the4gospels.